You're tuned in to Trax Momentum, 11:16 a.m. Kong Yu with you on a Tuesday show as always. Just in time for the start of our interview of the day. I'm speaking today with Julian Hyde, General Manager of Reef Malaysia. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you, Julian?
Very well, thank you.
All right, it's good to have you today. And we're talking about something that's very important because it literally is like 70% of our Earth, which is, as we know and we studied in school, ever since primary school, it's the oceans and water.
Mm-hmm.
Important things. Of course, you are from Reef Malaysia, expert on reef areas, more on the coastal areas. But today we're talking a little bit more general. We're going a little bit more general. We're actually going to be talking about the ocean itself, yeah? Now, let's actually begin with that. It's amounts of water, vast amounts of water, incredible depths. Right, and I think some portions of the oceans are so deep that no man has ever been to those depths, isn't it?
I think we actually just recently got to the deepest bit of the ocean.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, the 71%, it's like going back to O-level geography, isn't it? 71% of the world's ocean is covered, the world's surface is covered in water.
That's right.
Yeah, the deepest bit is the Marianas Trench in the Pacific. It's 11,000 meters and a little bit. And I think somebody got down there last year or the year before. So it has been down there, but it's very specialized technology. It's not easy to get there.
Well, it wasn't just a camera. They actually there was a human being submersible that actually had humans in it.
Yeah, I should have checked.
Wow. But it's, when you think about it, it's really incredible. I talk about 11 kilometers.
More than that. I mean, most people that see the ocean are either in an aeroplane, in which case it's too far away to make a difference. They're in a big ship, in which case, it doesn't matter. Or they're on the beach when the water's a foot deep, right? So the deep ocean, I think, is a place that most people don't think about, don't understand, no idea what's there. I mean, the average depth of the ocean is 3,700 meters.
Right.
That's the average around the globe. 60-odd% is deeper than 200 meters. The continental shelves drop off to about 200 meters, and then beyond that, down to the abyssal plain. So the shallow water of the shore goes out to the continental shelf at 200 meters, and then it all drops off way down to 4,000 meters. And that's just as an average. But the weird thing is that, as I said to earlier on, we know more about the surface of the moon than we do of the ocean's floor. Only 5% of the oceans have been explored. We only know 5%. 5%.
That's crazy to think about
amazing.
That. No wonder we know more about the surface of the moon.
Yeah.
But why is it? Is it because no one's just really bothered, or because especially in the past, it's just of such depths, it's so deep that they don't really know how to go explore?
I think it's the technological problem. I mean, as a leisure diver, I'm used to depths of the deeper leisure dives you'll do are 30 meters, occasionally a little bit more if there's a real reason to. Technical divers will go down to 50, 60, maybe 70 meters. Commercial diving, maximum 100 meters. So we're scratching literally scratching the surface. If you want to go deeper than that, then you're into specialized submersible vehicles, and the deeper you go, the more and more specialized it gets. So it's actually quite difficult to get down there to see what there is there. Very difficult.
I can only imagine. I mean, what was that? 20,000 leagues under the sea?
Yes. Don't ask me what a league is. I can't remember anymore. But yeah, I mean, it's deep, man. It's pretty deep.
And it's to me. I mean, I love the sea. Whatever that I can see from it, like mostly the beach and shallow waters. And it's just really fascinating because even if you go into the sea in shallow waters, you go snorkeling, you go diving, it really literally is a whole other world, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that world is really, really important in a lot of ways. Some minor ways I think that we can understand, but it's much more than that, isn't it?
It is. I suppose my natural inclination would be to say that the interesting bits of the ocean are the shallow bits, because we work with coral reefs, and coral reefs tend not to be found in very deep water. Corals need sunlight. So they're in shallow water. And you've also got seagrass beds, which are ecologically extremely important. Once you start getting deeper than that, I don't know what there is. I think large areas of the ocean are not really that interesting. There are particular formations called seamounts, where it's the best description I can think of is an underwater volcano. So the land rises steeply from the seabed and comes up to a point. And those are increasingly important in fisheries because there are fish aggregations in some of those areas.
I see.
They're also important. Scientists are finding new species down there. In interesting ecosystems. So you'll get a hot volcano vent where you get species that would only grow in those very harsh, very acidic, very hot conditions. So they're scientifically interesting. But if you think, most of us think of ocean, you think recreation, you think swimming, you think boating, fishing, diving, snorkeling, swimming, whatever.
Right.
And that's all coastal stuff. It's
Right.
all right off the beach. Yeah, that's what we know. That's all we know.
That's all we know. I mean, even the vast depths of the ocean, and there's so much water. How many gallons? How many liters?
I saw a figure, and it's 1.4 with about 24 noughts after it. So it's a lot. It's a lot
Right.
of water. Don't even bother.
So is that? I don't know. It is a fascinating question. I imagine. Yeah, what the answer could might be as to what do you do with all that water? I mean, does it really serve? How much of a role does that serve? I mean, water is important. Do we need 70% of Earth being covered in water so that the humans and other beings and animals and whatnot are thriving in the land areas? I mean, if we talk about just from a very individual perspective, from a very selfish perspective, let's talk about human beings.
Yep. As we do.
Yeah, as we normally do. Just as an example, how does that serve us? I mean, do you have an answer to that? That 70%.
Oh yeah. Definitely. I because I'm such I have a focus on reefs and nearshore ecosystems. I tend to think of the ocean in two bits. There's the deep ocean, and there's the shallow ocean. Right. So the shallow ocean has, for me, the interesting stuff. But we'll leave that for a minute. The deep ocean, all of that water does several things. First of all, it's absorbing a lot of the carbon dioxide that humans are emitting into the atmosphere, which some people say causes global warming, whatever. I'm not going to get into that debate, but there's no doubt the ocean has absorbed a lot of CO2. Secondly, it's important as a climate regulator. There's an underwater conveyor belt which is shifting warm water and cold water around the world's oceans, and that is important in regulating climate in several countries. The UK, for example, has the Gulf Stream running nearby, and that's what keeps parts of the UK climate as warm as they are. And it also means that there's cold areas as well on the poles. So that thermohaline circulation system is extremely important for regulating climate,
right?
For fisheries, because that water moving around is important for fisheries movement and spawning and so on. It's an important part of the carbon cycle. It's the primary, a lot of primary production, which is the most basic form of food, is in the ocean. The plankton, which use tiny microscopic organisms, use sunlight to produce foodstuffs, which are then eaten by less small things, which are then eaten by less small things, and then crustaceans and fish, and then bigger fish and tuna, and so all the way up that food chain, it started with sunlight and plankton. So that primary production is very, very important. We get a lot of our protein from fish.
Right.
Malaysia's the biggest per capita seafood eater in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Right. You'll love your seafood. Okay. No plankton, no seafood. Sorry.
Right.
So,
and not much fish.
Come
to think of it,
there wouldn't be any fish. Yeah. So you've got the carbon cycle, weather and climate. All those things, the deep ocean, terribly important for. Without it, life on Earth would be very difficult. Don't ask me what it would be, but if you imagine an unregulated climate and no primary production from the oceans, where would all that come from?
That's true. It's coming back slowly to me a little bit, especially when it comes to the regulation of climate, temperatures. Yeah, because water it has the ability, I can't remember the term, to take in a lot of heat and hold it and whatnot.
Yeah. It has a high heat capacity.
High heat capacity. There you go.
O-level chemistry now.
That's right. And you remember. Good on you. Speaking to Julian Hyde, General Manager of Reef Check Malaysia, on our oceans, just reminding ourselves on how important it is, and much, much more. Of course, we'll be talking about coral reefs also. Make sure you stay tuned. Keep it here on Trax. Good morning. We have a retro flavor there. Bangles, of course, with lovey ballad, Eternal Flame. And just to break things down right here, I'm speaking to Julian Hyde, who is the General Manager of Reef Check Malaysia, on the oceans, of course, on reefs and the water ecosystems at large. Yeah? Earlier on, we were essentially chatting. In case you just joined us right now, good morning to you. We were talking about, in the previous segment, literally how important, or reminding ourselves about our
Some
geography
O-level
lessons.
geography, yeah.
That's right, and a little bit of chemistry on how important, basically, that the oceans of the world are to us. Yeah, for many, many, many different ways. Is there, or do you think that? It might be a bit of a silly question. Do you think that any particular water mass or ocean is more important than another?
Oh, that's an interesting one. It's not a silly question. It's interesting because each bit of ocean is important in different ways.
Right.
So if you look at the seas around Southeast Asia, we've got what's called the Coral Triangle. Philippines in the north, Malaysia, and then Indonesia along to the east, and then Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands, Timor-Leste. And that's where most of the marine biodiversity is. So that's where most of the coral reefs are. That's where most of the diverse scene species is. So that's very important for fisheries and coral reefs. So it's tremendously important there. And then you look at the Arctic oceans, and that's important for a whole different set of reasons. You've got Arctic krill, you've got the plankton type stuff growing there and coming through that ecosystem, and then spreading out into the other oceans. You wouldn't say that one is more important than the other, but they each have their interesting bits to them.
And they all relate in a way, I guess, that's not too easy to understand, I can imagine. Some of the basic things that you just talked about. But what we spoke about earlier in the first segment was that, I don't know, but I think the average John or Jane or whatnot, we don't really think about how important it is for us, because, as you said, what we associate with the sea is literally just the beach,
the seaside,
occasional cruises, and boats and whatnot, and watching dolphins and whales here and there. What is it, do you think? Since you are here, I know that, of course, you're more of a reef person, right? What would you say that you would like to sort of remind all of us today on the oceans before we get to the shallow waters?
Well, unfortunately, these days, you've got the Silvery Earls of the world, the National Geographic explorers in residence, and they talk very passionately about the oceans. But one of the reasons we're talking about the oceans so much these days is because of the bad things we're doing to them. So let me give you an example of why we need to remember always what the oceans give us is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Google it, Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's one and a half times the size of the US. There are 45 kilograms of plastic in the water for every 1 kilogram of plankton. There are thousands and thousands of mammals and turtles or seabirds dying every year because of plastic ingestion. We have created that. It happens because of ocean currents, and this plastic happens to collect in the North Pacific Gyre. And not many people have heard about it. A little bit here and a little bit there. But if you want to think about why we should look after our oceans, well, let's think about what we have done to that ocean and what it's no longer providing us. It's killing seafood. It's killing animals that we would eat or that are important in the ecosystem. And we've unbalanced it. We have done that. All of the plastic we've ever produced is still out there somewhere. 90% of trash floating in the ocean is plastic trash. It breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, and then animals eat it. And guess what? We eat those animals. What is that saying for our diet? So, unfortunately, the oceans are wonderful and they're full of all these great creatures, but that's just a nice message. It's a nice picture, sea lions and all that.
Right.
But it doesn't seem to that resonates with people, but it doesn't seem to get them to say, okay, we understand this, and we also understand that they're important for fisheries and climate and so on, therefore we should protect them. That connection seems not to happen with a lot of people. So for the average Jane and John out there, look after your oceans. There you go.
Right.
There's a message.
That's a message. And that the plastic mass you're talking about, it's quite a lot. I've seen some pictures from it. It literally is just a collection of
plastic floating on the water.
That's,
unfortunately, this is one of the things that happens, is that somebody will take an image and they'll connect it with a message, but the two don't actually go together. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch is not actually an area of floating trash covering the ocean. It's an area where there is a lot of broken down into tiny pieces plastic, kind of submerged and floating around, suspended in the ocean, in the water. And so so it's not actually that visible. There is some stuff floating on the water, but it's not that visible. the scientists who are doing the work on this have to do trawls, and they have to collect bags full of stuff, and then they filter it and they separate out the organic from the inorganic matter. And that's how you get figures like 45 kilograms of plastic per kilogram of plankton. So it's difficult to see. And the fact that, again, it's invisible, it's not obvious, it's not in your face. People are like, oh, it's just water, it's just ocean.
Okay.
Never mind, it's fine.
Yeah. Well, well, maybe there is a reason after all of the vivid images, which are, either altered or they're taken at a specific location.
Yeah, it does get a message across.
Yeah, so we are talking. So just to remind ourselves, it's this plastic debris that's literally floating in the water. You can't really see it. I guess it's a little bit of a. You can see debris.
It's small. It breaks into very,
bits.
very small pieces, tiny pieces that small animals can ingest.
And there's are there efforts currently being taken to remove these, or
you can't?
Okay,
you can't remove it. We've got to stop. We've got to stop putting it in. All right, and we've got, hopefully eventually over time it will slowly sink to the bottom and get buried in the bottom silt, and then turn back into oil in another 50 million years time. But you can't remove suspended stuff like that. So it's a huge problem.
Wow, that's definitely something to think about. Other than that, it's a huge thing. Yes, I know. Are there any other sort of red alerts for our oceans? Are oceans healthy overall?
You'd have to say that with that amount of water out there have to be some clean areas, and I'm sure there are. The further away you go from human habitation, the cleaner the water is. The South Pacific Islands are in the middle of nowhere, so they're going to have clean water. The northern and southern oceans are going to be cleaner. But that said, there is a lot of trash going into the water every day. There's a lot of siltation from rivers and so on. And so I think what we like to talk about, and organisations like us talk about, is sustaining it in good condition. It's trying to say, look, we need to keep these things in good condition. We need to look after them a bit better, much as you would your own garden if you have a garden at home, much as you do your own car when you wash it. You're just looking after it so it stays in good condition and keeps working for a long time, and sustains your needs, be it transportation or food, into the future. There are some specific problems you can point to in the shallow water and in the deep water oceans. But to answer the question, I would like to hope that there's some clean bits of ocean out there.
Right.
I hope.
When it comes to Malaysia, other tropical countries, for example, and Malaysia being part of located rather in such an important part of the world, especially when it comes to coral reef systems and ecosystems and whatnot, do you think that we see generally more effects from what's happening on the land than what's happening from the deeper parts of the oceans?
Malaysia, yeah. A lot of our coastal waters are quite shallow. If you look at a lot of Indonesia on the southern side of the Indonesian islands, they drop off into the deep southern oceans. So there's a lot of clean water washing around out there. We're a little bit more landlocked by Indonesia on the other side of the Malacca Straits,
right?
By Sabah's over there, and we've got the Gulf of Thailand, so it's a little bit more landlocked, and so there's not so much of this big washing going. If you imagine the ocean circulation, the currents are very big areas of water, but very big volumes of water. But we suffer a little bit from being in slightly shallower water. But that said, if you go out to the islands on the east coast, you go out to Tioman, Redang, Perhentian, the water's lovely and clean. At the right time of year, there are local issues when the currents change and that siltation patterns change, but you head out to Tioman in let's say once the monsoon finishes, the next 2 or 3 weeks, you'll get lovely clear water. Yeah, it's not that bad. It's not that bad.
Right.
Yeah, west coast not quite so nice because the Straits of Malacca is very busy, but east coast, yeah, we still got some clean water out there.
And that's a real positive way of kind of doing things here. I mean, like, and you say that, and you really truly mean it from your professional experience, your professional opinion, I gather. And, so, and it's nice to know. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say that it is nice to know that we're not too bad. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it's it is difficult sometimes having a conversation like this not to come over all gloom and doom.
Right.
Okay. It's not all gloom and doom. There are some things we need to fix, but it's not unfixable at the moment.
There you go. Right. Definitely a good point for a break. We'll be speaking more with Julian Hyde, of course, who is the General Manager of Reef Check Malaysia, on what we can do in order to make that continue into the future, which is to keep our coral reefs as intact as possible. More with Julian in the last segment of the interview right here on Trax Momentum. Coming up to 11:43 a.m. on Trax Momentum. Welcome to the last segment. If you're just joining us right now, speaking to Julian Hyde, General Manager of Reef Check Malaysia. We talk about the oceans. We talk about a little bit on the reefs and what we have in Malaysia. Now, just to set us off in the right mood and also the right mode for this last segment, Julian, tell us a bit in summary, just to get us all on board on the reefs in Malaysia, how important that is, and how, in a sense, we are blessed actually being situated in this part of the world.
Okay, so we've got about 4,000 square kilometers of reef, which what does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Right. Not very much.
Okay.
So I like to try and explain it to people in terms of a specific location that they'll know. So divers or snorkelers or holiday makers will go to Redang, or they will go to Perhentian, or they'll go to Tiemen, and they will go snorkeling or diving, sitting on the beach, whatever. And first thing, think about all of these matsalis around. What are all these people doing here? Why are they here? Well, they've come all the way from Europe to dive on our reefs because they don't have them back there, right? So first thing, you've got nice warm water, and you've got lots of interesting things in the water, right? So remember that one. Good for Malaysians. But more than that, if you think about those reefs in economic terms, would those visitors be there if there were no reefs? Because the islands are basically based around marine tourism. You go snorkeling, you go diving, whatever. The economies would suffer greatly if the reefs weren't there, right? And so, what do the people do for jobs? And you end up with people having to move to other places, economic migration, and so on. So that's one thing. There's the economics from tourism and jobs and so on. The other thing that reefs are important for, of course, is fish. Is seafood. Malaysia, Philippines, parts of Indonesia, the islands, the local populations still live off seafood that they take out of the sea. Sorry, I mean, it's a bit of obvious, but that's what they live off. You'll go to islands in the Philippines, for example, you'll see people spend all day in the water fishing out whatever they, whatever's there. Right. So their reefs are tremendously important to the local economy and to local livelihoods. Tremendously important.
Are there any beaches, tropical beaches around the world that have no corals or very little coral? Well, yeah, no coral does not make sense, but are there, or is it comes with being in the tropics?
It's the tropics.
It's the tropics,
yeah,
isn't
it? They are a tropical ecosystem. So if you look around the globe, around the middle, that's a very technical term, around the middle, then you will find reefs around there. So if you go across the Indian Ocean, you'll find them in the Maldives, you'll find them in parts of Africa, and then in the Caribbean. The west coast of the States, not so much too cold, but again, following that all the way around, you will find reefs around that tropical zone, but not very far outside of it. So you don't need to go much further north than the middle part of Vietnam before the reefs start to peter out. So Japan has some cold water reefs, but not with the diversity that the Coral Triangle, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia has. The only exception is the Red Sea, where it's very diverse because it's very warm up there. But it's a narrow band around the equator that the reefs extend on. Right. Generally.
Yeah, and something Malaysians sometimes, I guess, I wouldn't say take for granted, but they're just not, maybe not quite aware of what's there. Because like I think I mentioned it the last time I spoke to you, is that I didn't grow up as a water baby. I think a lot of Malaysians typically don't. No. The younger generations are, I think, being thrown in the pool and the ocean so that they can swim. But not my generation, definitely not before. We're just not aware of what is there and how important that is. And that's kind of ironic, because you talk about then us being the biggest consumer of seafood, pretty much.
Go figure.
Yeah, speaking of that, I can't remember we touched upon this last time you were here. How is the seafood and how is the fish situation? I mean, it's pretty much, it sounded quite dire.
Unfortunately, I think it is. We don't have any solid data for Malaysia since 1999, when the last survey was done, and I believe there is another fisheries survey being either done or planned now. And at the time, they found that even then, a lot of the fisheries were overexploited or becoming overexploited. So, unfortunately, I'm not a fisheries guy, but I don't hear good things about Malaysia's fisheries. We are being encroached upon from outside. We're overfishing. There's overcapacity. A lot of problems. Again, fixable with good management, but not being fixed at the moment.
Good point. Yeah, no, we shall KIV that for another session as far as the details are concerned. Reef Check Malaysia. What's on the plate this year, and how do the activities tie in with what we need to do with our reefs, or what we, as in the general public, need to be more aware of when it comes to our reefs?
What I found over the last few years of working with Reef Check, we have been developing a focus and an approach, and it's not just us. This is happening from outside of us as well. What we are moving more and more towards now is recognizing that if you take a coral reef, there are two types of impacts on that coral reef. One of them is the big outside impacts like global warming that we can't do anything about. And the second one is what we call the local impacts. So that's stuff that happens locally that we can do something about. And if we can manage the reefs well, look after them well, then we can make sure they're as healthy as possible, and therefore more likely to withstand these big global things that there's nothing we can do anything about. So again, let's think of an island. Let's talk about Tioman, where we actually have a program going on. What are the local impacts we're talking about? We're talking about snorkelers walking on the reef.
Right.
All right. So snorkelers will go to a site on a boat, and they'll jump out in the water, and without really knowing it, they'll start walking on bits of coral because nobody told them that isn't rock, that's coral, that's alive, and you're going to damage it and kill it. So there's a huge education program to be done, education and awareness. Divers similarly can do a lot of damage without really realizing it. Bits of equipment that's not properly tied in, cameras and fins and things,
bumping into corals.
And the thing is, if you imagine some of the reefs out there which are made from branching corals, right, little finger-like stuff, one diver swimming over the top and breaking off a couple of fingers, it's nothing, it's fine, it'll be all right. But some of these sites see 100, 200 divers a day. On a busy weekend, there'll be 2,000 divers through the reef. So it's not just one, it's 2,000 people doing the same thing. So the potential impact there is huge. Can we do something about it? Oh yes, we can. We can train them better, we can manage them better, we can supervise them in the water better, and we can make them more aware of their impacts. So you've got divers and snorkelers, and they're an important part of the tourism industry. So we've got to manage these guys, right? And it's not difficult. On the islands themselves, unfortunately, not much sewage treatment around. Okay, so we're getting a lot of poorly treated and very poor quality effluent going from the land into the sea,
right?
And that has a whole range of impacts on reefs we can talk about separately, but it's not good. So why don't we put some better sewage treatment in place? It's not expensive, it's not technologically difficult. Well, okay, it might be a little bit expensive for a small resort, but it's not technologically difficult. It can be done. Like managing a construction site, similarly. So all of these little local impacts, which all can add up individually, you might think, well, diver kicking corals with fins, it's nothing. But Tioman gets 200,000 plus visitors a year, right? And if they all leave their mark, as it were, then that's 200,000 marks.
Right.
And that cumulative effect, we can manage, we can reduce that. So that's where we're looking now, is at improving the local management, working together with the management authorities, and trying to reduce all of those little local impacts bit by bit by bit, so we can have healthier reefs.
Are there areas or islands in Malaysia which limit the number of people who can visit, maybe a snorkeling site or a diving site in one day? Or generally how that works?
Yeah, the only one is Sipadan in Sabah, which has, I think, either 120 or 140 licenses. I should know, but I can't remember. But it's something like that. They limit the number of divers per day. I think it's 120. Nowhere else that I'm aware of really has limits like that.
Right.
But it's a very difficult thing to limit, because as soon as you start to talk about limiting numbers, then the businessmen are up in arms saying, "Oh, you're affecting our business." It's like,
right.
And I understand that.
Yeah.
There are other things that can be done, like spreading the divers out around dive sites. Like improving, okay, if there's a larger number of people, what infrastructure do we need to ensure that that bigger number of people doesn't have an impact. So it's back to management systems and infrastructure and so on, and making sure that we can manage this large number of people without killing the very thing that they're coming to see.
So that's going to be a key initiative for Reef Check for 2015.
Yeah.
What else before we wrap up for today?
That really is going to be the focus. To be honest, we want to get some. There's under the Convention on Biodiversity, to which Malaysia is a signatory, there's a bunch of targets called the Aichi targets, which were established back in 2011, 2012, and they call on nations to look at their ecosystems like coral reefs and seagrass beds and look at how we can reduce the anthropogenic impacts on them. And that's what we're at for the next few years. That's going to be our focus. So around Malaysia, trying to link the coral reefs to the seagrass beds to the mangroves, because they're all connected. We need to look at them more holistically and look at how we can manage those very specific local impacts in those areas to keep them as healthy as we can, sustain them as long as possible.
And on a slightly more personal note, I think it's a good year also for many different reasons, as mooted and suggested by many different parties with different interests. It's like, head out. If you're listening in right now, you're not a beach person, you're not an island person, maybe make that your next vacation. So you can check out what Malaysia really does have.
Do so, but when you're there, treat the reefs with respect.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Julian.
Welcome.
Right. It was a pleasure talking to you. Been speaking to Julian Hyde, General Manager of Reef Check Malaysia, on issues related to our oceans, information related to our reefs, as well, of course, with the key focus point in terms of the activities of Reef Check Malaysia for 2015. Well, all the best.
Thank you.
And have a great rest of 2015. And Happy Chinese New Year to you.
And to you, wife and family.